Hello everybody, welcome to this match concerning the Hague Inter-University Law Debate Tournament. We are in the day 2 and we have two teams, two universities will be competing in this match in order to get a spot for the 8th of finals. We have the Hague University of Applied Science and we have as well Masaryk University. They will be debating on a topic they received 7 days before, so it is actually the first time they meet in this competition, even through the different editions. So before welcoming them, I want to mention that, of course, we live stream from The Hague, and you'll be able to watch this match live or during the next days at any time you want. There will be 3 judges for this match. These 3 judges, none of them have any connection with these universities. And now, of course, it is time to give the floor to the students themselves to introduce themselves. So I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Tolga Dogan at the University of Applied Science. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course. I just have to wait for my... Yes, okay, perfect. My name is Tolga Doğan. I'm 20 years old, originally from Germany, Polish-Turkish background, and now I'm in my 4th semester, so my 2nd year in the International European Law program in The Hague.
Thank you very much, welcome. Now, on the side of Masaryk University, I would like to ask Mr. Dominic Vostal to take the floor.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Dominic Vostal, and I'm actually now in the 4th year of my studies, and I'm really looking forward to meet with you another time, or at least another time.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the second member of the team from the Hague University of Applied Science, Mr. Simon Kokval.
Yes, hello. So yeah, my name is Simon. Originally from it has different pronunciations, but originally from Norway, and also in the 2nd year of the European and International Law program here in The Hague.
Welcome.
And, excited to debate.
Thank you very much, welcome. Now we have as well the second member from Masaryk University, Mr. Adam Dobiasz.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm in my penultimate year of my studies at the Masaryk University, and I would just like to say that I'm very happy that we could participate in this competition, as it is this type of activity is not that usual in Czech schools. So I'm very happy that we can take part and meet some other people and have some matches.
Thank you very much. I want to mention as well that there is a third member in the team of Masaryk University who is not participating today. Both teams had a coach to prepare this match and this competition in general. The name of the coach on the side of the Hague University of Applied Science are Sayed Altamash Khalil, Leila Gaibova, and Mira Montero. On the side of Masaryk University, we have one of the 2 coaches, so Professor Martin Zvech as well. Maybe you would like to say some words?
Hello, good evening. It's great to be here, and I would like to wish good luck both of the teams.
Thank you very much. And the second coach for Masaryk University is Susanna Vikarczka. So I forgot to give our name. So my name is Ryan Orange, and my colleague Anna Maria Urbanova will be hosting this match. So I will share my screen because now it is time to, of course, allocate the position. So as mentioned previously, the students, they received by email 7 days ago the topic, and this topic is any land development or urbanization project that may affect an indigenous community must receive approval from a legitimate representative of such community, even if a neighboring country. So now I will share my screen, and after that, of course, you will know which position you have for the match.
As my colleague is sharing his screen, just a short reminder to the participants and then to the audience. If a yellow card shows for my video stream, it means you have 30 seconds left of your speaking time. If you see a red card, the red card will stay up until you stop speaking. It means your speaking time is over. You can still conclude your sentences comfortably, but please don't start a new one.
Yep. So I'm putting the wheel with the name of the two universities. So you will see in a few seconds. But I share my screen. I'm resizing a bit the window at this moment. Up. Sorry, it takes a bit of time. Voilà.
My colleague is preparing to share the screen. Just a reminder, the two teams have to prepare for both sides, for in favor and against, and it is only now that the positions will be assigned. Then there is 5-minute preparation period during which the teams can close their cameras, close their microphones, and we'll call back the team that gets assigned in favor position to start the reading.
So normally you should see in a few seconds on your screen what on YouTube they already see, meaning the wheel with the names of the two universities for the position in favor and against. So you have the chance, of course, to have each of the position in this wheel. So now we'll click in the middle and we'll know which position the teams will have for this debate. So this is Masaryk University who will be defining the position in favor. So in favor of this motion, and will be starting as well the match. And on the other side, the Hague University of Applied Science will defend the position against the motion. So it means concretely that Masaryk University will be starting the match and will defend the position that any land development or urbanization project that may affect an indigenous community must first receive approval from a legitimate representative of such community, even if in a neighboring country. On the other side, the University of Applied Science will defend the position that any land development or urbanization project that may affect an indigenous community must not receive approval from a legitimate representative of such community, even if in a neighboring country. So now my colleague will share the screen for the 5 minutes countdown, and you can close your camera and audio while you are reviewing your notes. And we start with Masaryk in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. The time is now over for your final preparation. The debate team from Masaryk University, who has been assigned in favor position, you have now 4 minutes to start your opening statement.
Great, thank you. Dear judges, adversaries, and colleagues, allow me to present our case for the debate. A position held against the notion of today's debate would directly contradict what the international community decided to instill in the Sustainable Development Goals included in the 2030 Agenda of the UN. More concretely, SDGs number 10 and 16, as established by the United Nations, emphasize the need to address inequality and justice. Furthermore, each SDG comes with a plethora of individual targets. In the present context, we decided to invoke access to justice for all and the creation of inclusive and representative decision-making processes. How can we speak of fulfilling these goals if we exclude indigenous communities from deciding on matters that directly affect them? To further support the notion, we would like to make several arguments that point to an underlying trend in international law. Although the UN Charter is based on the principle of sovereign equality, state sovereignty is not unlimited, as it is limited by the sovereignty of other states and the rights of individuals. Thus, any action of a state will inherently affect others. Fortunately, some states are aware of this and are coming up with solutions to reconcile the divergent interests. An example is the Espoo Convention of 1991, which bestowed upon the states an obligation that certain activities should be done with due regard to the corresponding interests of other parties to the treaty. Land development or urbanization projects can certainly have a similar transboundary effect. This serves as a testament to the fact that there already is a state practice that takes into consideration factors outside the borders of a given state. Moreover, there are many communities in the world today that are not duly represented. Rights accorded to some were not accorded to others. Speaking of examples such as the situation of the Kurds, Western Sahara, or South Sudan, we can see that not allowing communities to be represented accordingly can be a source of conflict and a threat to regional and global stability. Hence, it is in the interest of us all for indigenous communities to be heard. Particularly interesting to us is the case of South Sudan, where a non-state actor representing a community was able to bring its case in front of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. This was made possible thanks to the fact that there is a set of procedural rules called the PCA optional rules for arbitrating disputes between two parties, of which only one is a state. Thus, the institutional barriers that prevented communities from raising their voice are being slowly eroded. This broader inclusiveness, exemplified by the Abai arbitration, proves how useful it is for non-state actors to be heard in a court of law, as it helped the international community put an end to a long-lasting civil war in Sudan. Further, there has been an undeniable trend since the Second World War to give communities and peoples a vote on how activities that impact them should be regulated. The resolution of the General Assembly of the UN on the permanent sovereignty over natural resources declared, but it is not only states that have a stake in natural resources, but also peoples. Granting indigenous communities a say in how these natural resources are exploited would also further improve the international sphere in accordance with the Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that all have a right to an international order in which the rights contained in the declaration can be realized. We recognize the fact that people have the right to development. However, it must be said that this right is also related to indigenous communities, and hence their development should be considered as well. To conclude, I would like to mention that the push for broader inclusiveness is apparent even in corporate practices around the world. The concept of the social license to operate was first coined in the mining industry. The actions of the local community can affect the development project for better or worse, and the practice of private capital has shown that there are good reasons to get in touch with local communities and receive their consent. Thus, the social license to operate has become a widely used standard to gain legitimacy in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Debate team from the Hague University of Applied Sciences, you now have 4 minutes for your opening statement.
Most respected judges, honorable opposition, and esteemed audience. 476 million people identify themselves as indigenous worldwide, and they live in over 90 countries. Historically, they have been prosecuted and discriminated against by settler populations. Today, indigenous communities and the governments of the states they reside in have to deal with this legacy of oppression and discrimination and need to find ways to coexist. These increasing points of contact between the indigenous communities and the settler governments raise interesting problems and questions. In addressing these, we need to strike a balance between the interests of the international community, of the indigenous communities, and the governments of the states they reside in. Therefore, my colleague Simon Cockful and I, Tolga Doğan, are contesting the statement that any land development or urbanization project that may have an effect on indigenous communities must first receive approval from a legitimate representative of such community, even if in a neighboring country. We are going to substantiate our position by explaining the three following points. Firstly, under relevant international law, namely the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the International Labour Organization, indigenous communities shall merely be consulted. Secondly, there is no definition under international law of indigenous community. Therefore, certain groups may abuse the approval requirement of the statement as a de facto veto. Thirdly, there is no unitary definition under international law as to what constitutes a legitimate representative of an indigenous community. This could potentially grant effective veto power to multiple parties. Coming back to our first point, Article 6 of Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization grants indigenous peoples the right to participate in decision-making processes that affect their rights, positions, and interests. Paragraph 2 establishes that these consultations shall be taken in good faith. Similarly, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, a non-binding instrument, does not contain a general rule for acquiring consent by indigenous communities, but also only requires mere consultation. Hereby, it is very important to distinguish that a requirement to consult is in no way equal to an obligation to obtain approval or consent. Thus, a general obligation to acquire approval or consent for any urbanization or land development project does not exist under current international law frameworks. Secondly, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues holds that an official definition of indigenous has not been adopted by the UN system body. Rather, their approach relies on self-identification and cultural aspects. As we can see in the case Moana Community versus Suriname, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights granted land entitlement to an indigenous community for the land they inhabited but were not native to. In this fake approach could lead various communities in self-identifying as indigenous to take advantage of the requirements to seek their approval under this statement. According to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, more than half of Canada's indigenous population now lives in cities. Thus, requiring approval for land development or urbanization projects that could effectively grant a veto to potentially affect indigenous communities, as in the aforementioned case where they had granted rights over land they only inhabited. Thirdly, there is no unitary definition under international law as to what constitutes a legitimate representative of an indigenous community. In Canada, during the Fairy Creek protests from 2020 to 2021, the Pecheetah community protested against old-growth logging. The elected leadership distanced itself from the logging protest, while the hereditary decision-maker and speaker for the territory was in favor. This lack of definition may create uncertainty as to who actually represents the community. This leaves unclear whose approval is needed for the projects under the statement and potentially gives multiple parties the de facto veto. This could block any construction work by the state they reside in and is therefore highly disproportionate. For these reasons, we firmly believe that any land development or urbanization project that may affect an indigenous community must not receive approval from a legitimate representative of such community, even if in a neighboring country. Thank you very much, and we yield the floor back to the opposition.
Thank you very much. Debate team of Masaryk University, you have 2 minutes for your first rebuttal.
Right. Thank you for the opening statement. We are aiming in our submission and we are looking the referenda in a consideration in light of broader geopolitical and international law trends. It means that the indigenous communities have been regularly neglected in the past, which is the problematic in an international point of view. We are basing our arguments as well on the General Assembly resolution that was adopted on 22nd of December 2004, where they are aiming to promote full and effective participation of indigenous peoples in decisions that are directly or indirectly affecting their lifestyles, traditional lands and territories, their cultural integrity as indigenous people. It is as well considering the principle of free, prior and informed consent. We recognize the problem that it is hard to recognize who is the authority, but via the social license to operate, the businessman or the developer needs to find the specific authority to meet the minimal standards and to address the problems. Afterwards, it means when this developer will use this social license to operate, he will obtain the consent. It's set a situation, and it's important because it gives the project not only legality in terms of law, but it gives the state also the legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Hague University of Applied Sciences, your team has now 2 minutes for your first rebuttal.
Thank you very much for that rebuttal. So firstly, we would like to state again, as with our first argument, that from international legislations such as the ILO Convention 169 on indigenous people's rights, there's only a specific right to participate in decision-making process. And this is of course important, that they are part of the process and that they are able to share their opinions about issues that affect them. But it's also important to state that it doesn't grant them a de facto veto, because they're only able to participate in the decision-making process. And furthermore, it's also a big requirement for the companies involved in these construction projects and land development projects to reach out and find this this legitimate representative, because as we have already stated, there's no clear definition what a legitimate representative is and who that might be in situations where you have, for example, as in Norway, where you have an elected parliament that represents all indigenous Sami people in Norway, but then you might also have the local community, which may be specifically affected by that development project. So who do you consult then, and whose consent should be considered more valuable or more legitimate? And that's a very strenuous task to give to these companies who want to, and governments who want to have these development projects. Yeah, that would be my statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Returning to the Masaryk University, you now have 2 minutes for your second rebuttal.
Thank you. Well, I will target your argumentation. I understand it is hard for the firms, etc., but you must think about the future. When the companies will have the free way of the settlement, that there will be no legal problems, that the people will not take some legal proceedings, or they will not attack it, for example, as ecological activists with their bodies. In that way, it will help both as the community that will have based on which will satisfy the obligations of the state that target that need to provide specific rights for these communities, and as well it will provide better position for the businesses. Nextly, what must be said, the authorities are easy to meet. How my colleague mentioned, thanks to the arbitration, where was used specific optional rules for arbitrating disputes between two parties, of which only one is a state. It was functional, and there was a representative of such group. So in that way, it is not that problematic to find the authority that will be organizing this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. University of Applied Sciences, your team has now 2 minutes for your second rebuttal.
Thank you very much. The opposition has mentioned the issue of arbitration in which only one party was the state. We would like to highlight the fact that this is only possible because the state has, in this case, agreed to be subject to arbitration, which leads us to the next point of state sovereignty, which has been raised by the opposition in their opening statement. The notion of sovereignty entails that the state has the supreme legislative, judicial, and executive authority over their own territory, unless they have expressly agreed to limit the sovereignty, as for example with the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Requiring a state to obtain approval by an indigenous community in another state for a land development or urbanization project within its own borders would unjustifiably limit the state's sovereignty. As of now, there is no international agreement binding upon a state party that requires a state to seek this approval. Therefore, requiring a state to do so is an unjustified limitation of its sovereignty. Similarly, the opposition has raised the matter of environmental impact assessment in cases where acts of one state have a spillover effect into another state. However, environmental impact assessment, or this kind of extraterritorial impact assessment, only requires that the state takes diligence in mitigating environmental and in mitigating extraterritorial effects of their actions by consulting stakeholders and not asking for their consent. Again, this is only possible where the sovereign state has agreed to do so, and as of now, this is not the case. Therefore, the statement as such, in asking indigenous communities in another neighbor state for land projects urbanization within one sovereign state, is a violation of the state sovereignty and under the current international law framework, not justifiable and realizable. Thank you very much, and we yield the floor back to the opposition.
Thank you very much. We are now entering the last stage of the debate, the conclusions. The debate team from Masaryk University, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I will now conclude our position for the debate. In our case, for the proposition of today's debate, we have tried to underscore the importance of the rights of indigenous communities and their recognition, as well as the clear benefits that spring from this. We are aware that the push for a wider recognition of non-state actors on the international stage might be difficult. Nonetheless, the trends that have governed international law over the past decades can give us some hope that even indigenous communities might come to thrive in the 21st century. This overall trend, beginning after the Second World War with decolonization and establishment of the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, has shown that international law can address all the grievances and move forward. It must be said, however, that the work is not over, as many peoples around the globe suffer from issues whose origins lie in the not so distant past. Thus, we must do as much as we can to keep on improving the international community and recognizing the interests and needs of indigenous communities might do just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Returning the floor to the Hague University of Applied Sciences, you have 2 minutes for your conclusion.
Thank you very much. And we would also like to acknowledge the importance of indigenous people's rights. But to come back to a summary of our arguments. So any land development or urbanization project that may affect an indigenous community must not first receive approval from a legitimate representative of such community, even if it is in a neighboring country, because firstly, under relevant international law, namely the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the ILO Convention 169, indigenous communities shall be consulted and only ask for consent in exceptional circumstances, such as relocation and storage of disposal of hazardous materials on indigenous peoples' lands or territories. Secondly, there is no definition of indigenous community. Therefore, certain groups self-identifying as indigenous people may abuse the approval requirement of the statement as a de facto veto. Thirdly, there is no unitary definition under international law for what constitutes a legitimate representative of an indigenous community. Furthermore, indigenous communities often have complex social structure and decision-making processes, making it challenging to identify a single representative who speaks for the entire community, potentially granting effective veto power to multiple parties. Instead of always requiring consent, the focus should be on creating a collaborative and inclusive process that involves meaningful consultation and engagement with the community. This process should incorporate cultural sensitivity and respect for the community's traditions and knowledge, including their history and current relationship to the land. We thank you for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This now concludes the graded part of the session. Well done to both teams. Thank you very much for your research and for your preparation. You can all turn your cameras on, we are now in the part where the judges won't be grading, so it will be a little bit of kind of decompression after the match. So we will ask you for your feedback on how did you find the preparation, the topic, and the match itself. On that note, perhaps starting with Mr. Dobias from the Masaryk University.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to note that it is very interesting to see. The thing is that we prepare for both positions, so it was very nice to see that the opposition chose to use very similar arguments we came up with when we were preparing for the against positions. So that's very nice to see that we think alike.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dogan, how did you find the preparation?
For me personally, I thought it was challenging to advocate for Khan, as you kind of had to play devil's advocate. Of course, nobody wants to rally against indigenous people's rights and their and against a requirement to seek approval, as personally you might agree with such a policy. And for pro, there was an abundance of case law and legislation to consider. Therefore, the challenge in that was finding the most convincing, the best argument to choose. But I think, yeah, we struck a nice balance, but we're of course sad that we could not showcase what we had for the pro department, but we see that our opponents also did a great job at looking for relevant legislation and relevant provisions to justify their arguments with.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vostal, how did you find the topic? Did you actually allow me to add one more question to the bunch? Did you perhaps encounter similar topics in your studies?
Well, it was really interesting, I must say. At least it was much more interesting than the previous one, because here we could play the devil advocate, I would say, in both positions. And I must say that really the preparation was hard, and I think it was really time consuming for both parties. And really did a very decent job, and I'm really looking forward in that way.
We are very happy to share once the feedback is received by the 3 judges, all of them whom will be scoring independently, to share it with the teams. From the Hague University, Mr. Koppel, how did you find the debate? Did you perhaps encounter the topics already?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, as I am from Norway, this has been like kind of going on the last couple of months specifically, because we had like big protest over this case that well, we didn't get to mention it because we didn't get pro, but there was like this ruling that yeah, basically indigenous people's rights were violated in the Supreme Court case, and then after basically nothing happened after that judgment, so there was ongoing protests about what should the government do when there's this situation where you have an ongoing human rights violation. So yeah, I found it quite on topic, and yeah, I found it a very interesting thing to debate.
Right. Thank you very much. Indeed, throughout the competition, you'll be facing different topics. From each round, there's a different theme. And as we continue more and more, there will be not only developing areas, but also topics with better established case law and legislation throughout different regions of the world. On that note, allow me to pass the floor back to my colleague, Mr. Lorange, who will be closing the session.
Yes, thank you very much. So congratulations for your debate, and as well indeed to try to find indeed arguments against sometimes maybe your personal opinions or the general opinion, because as you can imagine, when there are debates in parliament, international organizations, there are lobby from all sides, and of course their job is to find as well argumentation which is as well convincing enough to get, of course, those who vote or those who decide on their side as well. So it's good to as well to explore what is the strategy on the other side as well, and the arguments and the reasoning behind. So yes, very good. For the next round, you will have a different theme again. All of these themes until the final are connected actually to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So each time you have to explore, of course, different treaties and different case law. And in this way, sometimes it's connected to something you already studied, sometimes not. But for all teams in the competition, indeed, they have unique topic, and it is a way as well to explore and to find a possibility to have an argumentation in favor and against. So on my side, I have a very last question, a traditional one, which is for the students themselves about simply their traveling habits, or plans. So Mr. Dogan, could you tell me if you have been in Czech Republic already?
No, I have not, unfortunately. Although I plan to go to Prague. My sister went there for a class trip. She had a great time. And my roommate is from Prague as well, so she tells me the best spots to go to. So I'm very much looking forward to going and seeing Prague myself finally.
Okay, and if you can extend a bit your trip to go to Brno as well, that would be a good way to meet your opponents, of course, as well. On the side of Masaryk University, Dominic Vostal, have you been in The Hague or in the Netherlands before?
Actually, not yet. I want to at least maybe in the finals.
Yes, of course, that's a good motivation indeed. But of course, you can plan it.
I absolutely want to visit, and well, if you will be in Brno, just you can write. We can go for the beer.
Yes, thank you very much. On the side of Simon Kogval, have you been in Czech Republic?
Yes, actually, I've been to Prague. I found it very beautiful. Didn't have that much time. I had like about a day, but really loved walking around the center and the old parts and up to the big church, and the view you get there was really beautiful. And then we did have, because we took the train to Budapest from there, and then we did have like a quick stop in Brno. So we only had like a really quick walk up to the church next to the train station, but definitely want to go back and explore more.
Okay, so this is the occasion, indeed, maybe to get some contacts. Mr. Adam Dobias, have you been in The Hague?
No, not yet, even though I would like to go one day because of how The Hague is connected to the legal profession. But I think Simon is from Norway, as he said, so this summer, if everything goes well, I'll probably travel to Norway. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
So which part of Norway, because it's a pretty long country, and south, north?
Yes. I would like to travel through the Baltic states, Finland, and into Norway, so do some sort of a wraparound.
You don't want to go through the south, but through the north, yeah. So, okay. And so you are from the north or south, Simon?
Yeah, I'm from the north, so I would definitely say that's a cool way to do it. Most people start from the south, and I think it's a bit of a shame because then they just stick with Oslo and maybe Bergen. So it's really nice that you want to also see the north. There's some beautiful spots.
Okay, so indeed, if you want, you can keep contact, of course, or try to get some advice from each other. So many thanks. I would like to thank both teams. I would like to thank my colleague as well who hosted the match. Of course, the coach. Again, you will have the results in a few days. It depends on the judge when they will be watching, and of course, they will be sending the forms. But yes, you receive it by email with the score as well, and 7 days before the next match you receive the next topic, so don't forget indeed that is until the end of March, the group phase, and then the 8th of finals will be at the end of April, actually, around 1 month later. So many thanks everybody. I hope, do you want to have a last word, Anna Maria Urbanova, or?
No, everything was said. Just once more congratulations to both teams.
Thank you. Many thanks as well on YouTube for watching, and of course keep in touch for the next match. See you, bye bye in Czech Republic and bye bye in The Hague.
Bye.